everyone. Welcome again. This is the first episode of the 30 Days of Activism that Elliott Climate Action Initiative is taking to see how we can spotlight different people doing great things when it comes to women, gender, girls, and building sustainable world through research, studies, and the rest. And to me, today, I have a very special girls that talk about gender, peace, security, and other related issues to women and girls. And they will be introducing themselves briefly to us to know more about what they are doing and their various work. So you have the floor. Thank you so much.
It's great to be with you.
Great to be with you, Adenike, and thanks for inviting us.
Oh, thank you so much. In our words today, women are facing the biggest impact of bearing the brunt of the climate change crisis. And hence, we all need equality in solving the defining issue of our time, because you can't take women out of the solution in looking for solution for the climate change crisis. We are all needed to solve that solution. We are all solution makers, solution provider, and the rest. So back to the work you people do jointly together. From what I have read so far, I came across one of people's research that talks on gender and security agenda strategies for the 21st century. And I saw that there were different things that was discussed in it. So can you briefly just tell us what it's all about? Because the 21st century is here, is now. So what do you people really think are the problems? Where do we need to, what is needed to be solved and how it should be solved? And what is this research all about when it comes to the gender, security, and peace?
Yeah, maybe I'll start off by saying that we did this book on the gender and security agenda strategies for the 21st century because we were both really sort of frustrated by the lack of gender perspectives in international security analysis, both in terms of scholarly work that is done on international security challenges, as well as the policies that are being put forward by different countries in the world. And of course, we've seen now 22 years ago that the international community, and particularly the feminine and female activist community, has come together to push forward a women, peace, and security agenda, which basically said that it is really important when we talk about international security issues to have and to hear about the voices of women. And that led in 2000 to the adoption of UN Security Council Resolution 1325, or what we also call the Women, Peace, and Security Agenda. And so I think for a lot of our work, what we're really trying to emphasize is that we need to incorporate a gender perspective in our analysis. We are not doing that sufficiently currently. Michael?
Yes, and I think a key point that Chantal just noted was that the first of the Women, Peace, and Security resolutions was adopted by the UN Security Council in the year 2000. And so that was more than 21 years ago. There are now a total of 10 Women, Peace, and Security resolutions that have been adopted. And so this is very much on the international agenda at the United Nations. But the key is to take real action at the national level. And about half of the UN member states have adopted what are called national action plans to implement these resolutions. But as Chantal has found in her own research, a lot of these national action plans don't really have much behind them. There's often very little money behind them, very little policy initiative in terms of implementation. And so a lot of policymakers, especially at the national level, will talk about women, peace, and security, and we'll talk about women and climate change, but there's still a huge gap between the statements that have been made and the policy actions that are needed. There's just an enormous gap between the talk and the actions. And that's where we are now, 2 decades into the 21st century. And so in terms of conflict issues, which were the original driving forces behind the women, peace, and security movement, and now climate change, which, as you know in your own work, is a huge challenge with huge impacts on women and girls and all people. It's more important than ever in the 2020s to take some real concrete actions to move these priorities forward. And it's very important to take a gender perspective on all of these issues. I mean, one of the things we tried to do in our book was to look at traditional security issues like armed conflict and terrorism, as well as non-traditional issues like climate change and development, and also humanitarian emergencies like pandemics. Climate change has tremendous security implications, as you've talked about in some of your other articles and your other reports. And so, talking about women, climate change, and security all at the same time is very important.
Yeah, thank you so much, because all issues in our society today, they are all gendered right now. And so there's a need for that perspective to come in everything that we talk about, so that we can solve the defining issue of our time, because it all requires equitable solution. And very well, you also mentioned about the gender action plan, the gaps between the words and the action. Of the truth, some countries have started the gender action plan, just like Nigeria. But what do you think needs to be done beyond just the paperwork that have been done when it comes to this gender action plan? And also, you also mentioned, Chata, you also mentioned about feminist policy. What do you think can be done? Because I know a country like Sweden talks more about it, because we need it in our policy. That is part of bringing in gender perspective into the defining issue of our time, together with climate-related policy, because the climate change crisis knows no boundaries. So if we don't add the feminist policy and also the the climate policy, it might not look well, it might not go well. So what do you think can be done in that aspect that country can come together to do? And Michael, also tell us more about how can we localize the gender action plan that some countries have done, but there's still more work to be done between filling the gaps between action and words. Thank you. Chata, you can go.
Yeah, so I think, when you look at the past 20, 50 years, what we've really seen, and what is the one single thing that really pushes governments to take action, is the activism of people like you, actually, and of the feminists who have been working tirelessly and who continue working tirelessly and often at great risk for their own life, but they do move the policies of people. And so the action of civil society, the action of women's organization has been really crucial to making progress. And I would impress upon all of us to continue this action if we want to make progress on gender equality in general. I also want to emphasize, when we talk about gender, we really want to talk about gender and not just about women. Most of the time when policymakers talk about gender, they actually talk about women, and they do sort of, oh, well, this is a women's issue. It's not really that important. We'll get to it once we have solved the big important issues. But gender is really about all of us, whether we are men, women, transgender. It's about all genders and it's about all people. And the impact security, climate change has on people is different depending on where we stand in society, depending on our what we do in society. And so, for instance, in terms of climate change, we often say that women disproportionately are affected by climate change. And that is true, particularly if you look at, for instance, the health impacts or impacts on food security. And so I think it is important to make these distinctions and to understand what is happening in your society for different groups of people. And currently, we're not sufficiently adapting both our policy analysis and our policy actions to such a nuanced view of, what is actually happening within society.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. And I really want to emphasize the importance of women and women activists like you, Adenike, in continuing to push these issues, because in the 1990s, it was women activists who generated the UN actions on women, peace, and security. And 20 years later, they are still the driving force behind these efforts. And when we look at the new crisis, which should be leading to action, climate change, again, women are especially affected by the impact of climate change in terms of food security, water security, even the conflict problems that come out of climate changes have tremendous, dangerous effects for women and girls, as we've seen in Nigeria and in countries around the world. And you talked about this, Adenike, in your excellent article on climate change and livelihoods in the Lake Chad region. We see this in your part of the world, but in other parts of the world as well. And one other factor I want to introduce just into the discussion, and we should all be thinking about this, and everyone says, what do we do about climate change? And there's a lot that needs to be done. And obviously in the global north, which uses huge amounts of fossil fuels, in the global north, we need to do a better job of transitioning from fossil fuels to green energy, because that's absolutely essential. And I think there might be a tendency in some parts of the global south to say, well, gee, this is a problem that you are doing to us and you need to do something about it. And they're absolutely right in saying that the global north has primary responsibility for fossil fuel use, industrialization, and all of the adverse effects of that. But another important factor in the equation is population and population growth. And the number one place in the world that is going to see the most population growth between now and 2050 is Africa. Africa's population is going to approximately double to 2.5 billion people over the next several decades, from around 1.3 to 2.5 billion people. And Africa's population might triple to 4.3 billion people by the year 2100. And in Nigeria's population is probably going to also double from a little over 200 million to around 400 million by the year 2050. And so for a continent like Africa or a country like Nigeria, which is very much worried about climate change and resource consumption, which you've written about, one of the key factors in resource consumption is population. And getting population growth under control is going to be absolutely key. And one of the keys to that is the education of girls and women. When girls and women are educated, family sizes go down. instead of having 4 or 6 or 8 children, women are more likely to have 1 or 2 or 3 children. And we've seen this around the world. And so this is another area where gender equality and the education of girls and women is going to be key to addressing a lot of the climate change issues that we're already trying to deal with, because education of girls and women is a key factor for a whole host of reasons, but
Oh,
also in terms of resource demands.
thank you so much. Okay, you want to talk? Okay.
Danica, maybe I forgot to talk about the feminist foreign policy, as you mentioned.
Oh, yeah.
You know, Sweden started this, but now we have, I think, over 7 countries who have declared a feminist foreign policy, including the new government in Germany. But we've also, Mexico has announced last year a feminist foreign policy. And it's really important that countries develop such a policy. And what does it actually mean? I think the Swedish minister, when Margot Wallström, when she launched the feminist foreign policy, really said it best. She said, you know, a feminist foreign policy is about the 3 R's. That is about rights, human rights for everybody. It is about representation, that everybody has to be represented into policy-making governing bodies. And it is about resources, making sure that everybody can have access to rights, can have opportunities, and can be represented in policy governing bodies. And so a feminist foreign policy is actually a policy that is guided by 3 very simple principles. It's by the 3 R's, about rights, it's about representation, and it's about resources.
Thank you so much. I'm really enjoying this conversation. And yeah, you've mentioned quite a lot of things. And part of it is, I saw a research or a study to say that you also authored, chartered, talking about gender, peace, and security, then plus women, peace, and security. So I really want to know what that article is all about. And you, Michael, talking about terrorism and also women and gender issues. What are the missing links? Because I saw an article that you also authored on that aspect. So Chata, you can go before then we wrap up with the final question in this section.
Yeah, so the Women, Peace and Security agenda is, as Michael has said before, really was launched by the adoption of UN Security Council Resolution 1325 by the UN in 2000. And now over 50% of UN member states have adopted national action plans to give to help implement this Women, Peace and Security agenda within their own policies. And I think we've made a lot of progress in the last 20 years, but there's still lots to do. And I think there's still lots to do in terms of representation, both, and that's not only representation in terms of peace negotiations, but that's also just representation of women within national parliaments, etc., and governing bodies at the local levels, because it's also extremely important that we engage everybody at the local level. And then, of course, you know, one of the limitations of this agenda has been a lack of resources and, in general, a lack of, I must say, you know, disdain by most of the policy world. You know, the policy world, whether it's in the US, whether it's in Europe or Africa or Asia, is still a very male-dominated world. And, you know, they continue to think, well, women's issues is not that important. And I think we are seeing some change, having, you know, countries adopt feminist foreign policy is an important step forward It is an important signal and to other countries in the world. But, as I said before, we have to keep pushing because there are lots of other forces within society
Just to cut
that are
you,
trying to roll back
just
gender
to cut in.
equality efforts.
Sorry. And also, I want you to talk about this aspect. I saw that you authored that part too, where you talked about women, peace, security, and gender, peace, security. What was it all about? Like, isn't it the same thing? Isn't it two coins of the same side? Or what's really propelled that studies? Because I saw it as part of the studies or research that was carried on by you. And
well,
Michael too.
Very briefly, why we said this agenda has to be not just women, peace and security, but also gender, peace and security.
All right.
Because gender is not just women, and the women, peace and security shouldn't just be about women. It's about all of us, including men. And we thought it might be better to add that gender dimension that really shows that we're not just talking about women or women and children, but that we're talking about everybody in society. And that's what was behind that article, which said WPS plus GPS. For instance, currently we're working on a book that looks at the role of men and masculinities in international security. That looks at, how these male-dominated structures, these patriarchal structures, are continuing to influence the way we look at issues, the way we analyze issues, and the way policy is being made. And so we think it's very important to talk also about men and sort of, what's the core problem of this issue of gender inequality?
That would really be a very good article. Like, I want to read it. Let me see that perspective that you're bringing in, to further buttress what you're trying to talk about, because we all know that the climate change crisis affects both gender differently, and everyone has risks to the climate change crisis. But the most hardest is are female because of the vulnerable position that they found themselves through their traditional, cultural, societal, and environmental roles that they have to take in that light. And very well, you have said it, most of what we are talking about and what I want you to address. And now, Michael, because you both write articles jointly, authors and the rest, and I saw one that talks about women, gender, terrorism, the missing link. Michael, can you tell us about it? Because I saw that you are very passionate when it comes to women, girls, gender, the rest. We really need many people like you that could also speak up on this issue, so as to show solidarity for women and girls that this issue is affecting both gender and need to be addressed jointly, not by one side or the other.
Yeah, thank you. And just to follow up on what Chantal is saying, I think it's important across a wide range of issues, including armed conflict and terrorism, but also climate change and the effects of the pandemic that we see around the world, that we focus on these issues. And we really do need to talk about women, men, and gender all at the same time. And this general set of issues is the missing link in policy discussions in almost every policy area, in almost every country around the world. And as Chantal was saying, at the national level in particular, you see this in terms of who the national leaders are, but also who are the key participants in the policy-making establishments. And it's men. Men still are overwhelmingly in charge at the national level. And so the participation of women needs to be advanced in the 2020s. It's still a priority, even though the UN has been talking about it now for over 20 years. The participation of women is key. And so overall, I would say if the missing link is that we don't talk enough about gender issues, more specifically, we need to continue to push the participation of women in policymaking at every level, certainly at the national level, but also at the international and local levels. And this is also tied to the education of girls and women in schools, because obviously that is the foundation for getting women to participate more and more at the policy level. And so we have to do both things at the same time. Yes, we have to talk about gender and men, but let's not forget that the key focal point has to be the empowerment and participation of women, and the starting point is the education of girls and women, and that's just a key factor in the overall equation. And so the missing link continues to be the fact that women do not participate as much as they should be in policy making at the political level. That continues to be the number one priority for me and for many people.
Thank you so much. Like, you have really touched on several aspects, several places I needed you to talk about. And so just give me just one word about what you think about the old conversation that you have been talking about like decades ago. What are the way forward and the rest? We just have a few minutes to go on this section. So I just wanted to keep it to just 1 minute each. Thank you so much.
Well, I think you are the way forward. And, as we can help, I think having the activism of movements that are composed of young women and young men is really crucial. The future is yours. And I think for us, the responsibility is to support that and to provide opportunities for young activists to make their mark.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I agree completely. And Chantal has been both a professor and a leader of a women's organization, and I'm a professor, so I obviously believe in education, and I believe in the importance of educating the next generation of international leaders like you to help push these things forward. These challenges are multi-generational challenges. They obviously have not been solved by our generation, and there will still be problems after your generation, but we have to keep pushing forward and working together on these issues. I've already talked about the importance of educating girls and women at every level, from kindergarten through 12, through college and beyond. It's important to put money into these issues, as Chantal and I have talked about. And at a very basic level, this will seem very mundane, but it's important to get national governments to collect data and information on what's happening in their countries, and to make sure that this data is organized in terms of women and men. It's sometimes called sex disaggregated data or gender disaggregated data. But it's important just to draw attention to and to collect information on what's going on at the national level in terms of girls and boys, women and men, so we know what's going on. And in many cases, that's not being done. And you're doing it in your work, and we're doing it in our work. But it's important for governments to do this as well. Just collect the information so we can see the picture, so we can see what's happening to women and girls and men and boys and everybody else, so that we can see the gender dimensions of these problems to take gender actions.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. You both are also a classical example of what a balanced society decision impact should look like, because you are all both speaking about this thing, women, men, and this is how it should look like. You know, our society should look in a balanced way whereby we can all find solution. As Chantal is trying to bring our perspective, Michael is bringing his perspective. Nobody's right is being left behind. So that is how a society should function, should work, acknowledging it and also putting it into action. That yes, because we have seen several acknowledgements of this policy, women's policy, but little has been done. So we have to bring this together to know that a balanced society is possible when we all come together to make things work in an equitable solution. So thank you so much. I really enjoyed my time speaking with you today, and I hope we could also do this next time. And great time. I know that our audience have learned a lot, and you could also watch out for their new book that they'll be releasing soon. So you can go get it at any bookshop. Probably might be available in Nigeria yet too. So just give us, just tell us once it is ready, then the audience could also go get it too. Thank you so much. And I really wish you well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adenike.
Our pleasure.